So, morning, AnYes. Thank you for joining us as on part 2 of our Decksender Coronavirus Startup Survival Guide. So,
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and just give us a little bit of background, and then I can ask you a few questions.
Yeah, I have 25 years of corporate experience. I went through a series of reinventions. The last one being the most epic one, I would say, is that I arrived 5 years ago almost in London with 2 suitcases after having lost absolutely everything at 58. So I'm the walking example that it is never too late to reinvent yourself. And I'm now known as the Reinvention Mentor. So I'm a women's empowerment coach. I am on a mission to help as many women as possible to reach their full potential professionally and personally, so that in doing so, they can become role models for more women to do the same. And in parallel of that, which complements beautifully what I'm doing, I'm also the regional director of the female business network, the Athena Network, for the central London region, where I run 7 groups, so over 100 women.
Awesome. So busy. I think
quite busy, yes, indeed.
Yeah,
in particular now,
time,
because we had to pivot, of course.
So how are you coping? How are you coping personally? How are you coping in general with the lockdown measures that we're now kind of living under in the UK?
Well, to start with, I'm in self-isolation myself since yesterday. So yeah, it happened here also. I had very, very mild symptoms, so far so good. But coming back to your question about how am I coping, you may have noticed the capital Y in my first name, AnYes. It is because I say yes to life. So I have a very positive attitude to everything that's happening in general. Now in particular, of course. I do believe that absolutely everything starts with a matter of mindset. And that is what I'm applying to myself. I walk my talk, I think is the expression in English. And that is what I help my members in particular at Athena do as well as my clients, is to make them see that in any situation, you can either be completely overruled by fear, or you can use that energy as a fuel as opposed to let it paralyze you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that was one of the main reasons why we were so keen to talk to you, particularly from our community perspective, because I think there's the kind of obvious things that particularly startups are looking to do at the moment, which is conserve cash and, be frugal during these times, because they don't necessarily know where their next funding round or where their next piece of revenue is going to come from. But I think equally as important as that is their positivity, their mental well-being, how people are actually coping with these situations, because it is very easy to kind of, particularly if you're isolated at home and you're kind of home working, you're away from your team, it's really easy to kind of get down and to kind of lose track of your goals and what you're trying to achieve as a business. And equally, there's a lot of the things that people are reading at the moment is, sack everyone and keep your money in the bank and, literally hunker down for 6 months, which is not really massively positive for a lot of
Right, it isn't. Clearly it isn't. And I do definitely have a theory also around the fact that I do believe that everything is done to keep us in fear. That's just a general thing. So yeah. I don't watch telly. I'm just keeping myself, informed, but the minimum that I need. And for the rest, I'm not looking at it. Your attitude towards absolutely everything is dictating is dictating the consequences. So it's not the circumstances that will dictate what happens to you. It's how you react to them. And that is a really important thing to know. So one of the things that I will always say, and you may have heard me say that before, every single day, we only have 100% of energy, whatever energy it is. Some days it's a lot, some days it's not. It still is 100% of what you have. The key is to ask yourself, what do you choose to focus on? So catch yourself being in in a bad, mood, whatever, acknowledge it, don't ignore it, don't do as if it's not existing, but then move on. What is it that you can actually do? The antidote to fear is action in reality. So there are tools, of course, for that. The very first thing that I always say, and again, I'm a walking example of it, what has kept me running when I had absolutely nothing, is that I had a very strong vision. I knew what I wanted to achieve. So having a very strong vision, I always say, is your compass. It's the direction you're going to, but it's also your anchor, because it's very easy to get, oh my God, I'm afraid, and I lose track of absolute. It's anchoring you. It's helping you then see, oh, this is where I want to go. Let me not look at what doesn't work. What can I actually do to make it work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's something that's really important right now, because I think there's a great tendency, as a founder of businesses myself, there's a great tendency when things go bad to kind of snap decisions out and, do things without thinking about them too much, because you just feel that kind of anything's going to solve a problem. And it feels like what you're saying is very much, don't lose sight of where the end goal is, and kind of declutter the decision-making process of the things that you actually can't do or that you don't have any control over, and kind of focus on what you can do. No, that's really good advice. I mean, that sort of goes hand in hand, I guess, with a lot of businesses that we're talking to at the moment are feeling quite powerless at the moment, and quite sort of out of control of the situation. I just wondered what you thought, or if there's any kind of advice that you might have for people that are just kind of sat there thinking, what do I do? What are some coping strategies?
Coming back to one thing you mentioned earlier on, the very first thing to accept, it is absolutely normal, it's human nature to have a fear reaction. So don't dismiss it. The key is, as I said earlier on, is not to stay with it. That's the first thing. We tend to forget that we have an end destination, the vision, the goal, and that life stands in the way. Well, this is a very good example of it. Life does happen. And that destination, you may not always, I always take the example of when you're driving at night and you're going somewhere, say Liverpool for the sake of the example, you don't see the road, but the road is unfolding as your lights are lighting up the road. So it's trusting that your GPS will actually bring you there. However, there may be roadworks, and suddenly you may have to go to the left or to the right or whatever, but your GPS will bring you back to where you want to be. Yeah. So that's the thing from a mindset perspective. It's very important to trust that it will happen. Again, if you have a vision, if you don't have it, you could go anywhere. The other thing is, I'm thinking about three things at the same time now. I need to refocus to see what I'm going to say first. The other thing is to know that when we have a plan, whatever plan, we've set up the strategy and, next step was going to be whatever. And now all of a sudden, the only way is to think differently. The way is to think out of the box. Yesterday, I had a conversation with one of my members who actually, the type of work that she does is in person. It's food related. And when we were talking before this interview, we mentioned something similar. And she had not imagined at all. She was so much operating from a place of fear. I'm the breadwinner. I can't make money anymore. How do I do? That she hadn't thought that she could actually be giving baking lessons online. And that ultimately, interestingly enough, the time that she would spend now to create those videos will generate her passive income later when she can start baking again. Yeah. So what is it that you can do that would still generate a form of income, maybe less, but still a form of income, so that you move away from the basic needs type of fear. And then also whatever it is that you're doing will be, and that's related to whatever you do, your work, your business, is also your driving force. So being connected to that driving force is going to lift your spirits, even if it's not exactly the way that you had planned it to do. The important thing is always to keep your vibration very high, because another thing that I keep saying is that the more you will give grip to fear, fear will generate stress. Stress will be higher. What that implies is that your immune system will be lower. So you are increasing your chances to actually get the virus in this situation. So what is it that you can, because what is it that you can do to constantly focus on what works as opposed to what doesn't work? In any circumstances, even when they are very, 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 very complicated, because each of us are involved at a different level. For some people, it's really very, very serious. There still is always things that you can look at that are positive. And the more you are looking at things that are positive, the higher your spirit, the more you will attract that type of things to you. I'm a very firm believer in the law of attraction. So it absolutely works. And in particular, when you don't believe in it, you attract more of the negative to you. But take action. The other thing also is you may be in a situation where whatever it is that you're doing now, there's no way it links to your business. Maybe it's impossible. Maybe you will find some sort of a side job that's totally unrelated or whatever. Meanwhile, you want to make sure that you stay connected to your audience. So I have an Athena member who's currently she's a beautician. She's doing videos on how to create your own face masks, whatever, at home. But it doesn't generate her any form of revenue. She does it for free. However, when we will come at the other end of all of this, and we will at some point, she will still be top of mind for her ideal audience. They will remember her. And at the other end, and again, we were briefly talking about that before the interview, there will be so many, many, many needs, because people will have been so frustrated by this lockdown, etc., that there will be massive reactions afterwards. So there will be a lot of needs. If you have forgotten your audience, if you have not stayed in touch with them, have not nurtured the relationships, etc., even if it hasn't generated any business, you're out of business at the end of all of this. Whereas if you have maintained all of that at the end of this, you are going to pick up a lot of business. And I do believe, it may sound horrible to say it like this, but this is such an opportunity for us to step out of our comfort zone, think creatively, think out of the box, and we will come back at the other end with stuff that we had not imagined. There's a lot that is going to be changing after this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would, I totally agree with that. I think this is an opportunity, you know, as you say, for a lot of businesses to connect in ways that they've maybe not thought about previously, particularly, you know, given that a lot of companies have got, you know, they've got a flow through of revenue, they've got customers coming on and buying stuff or visiting them and buying stuff. You know, if that goes away, what can they do? It's a brilliant opportunity. You know, I say this from my background in sort of advertising marketing, but it's a brilliant opportunity to build a brand at the moment, and video and connecting with that audience are great tools to be able to do that and kind of offer up some value that is going to pay dividends at some point in the future. Because you're absolutely right to paraphrase your example of a beautician. You know, as soon as we kind of come out of this lockdown, there's going to be an absolute surge towards those kind of businesses. You know, everybody's going to want to go and get a haircut. Everybody's going to want to go and get their nails done. You know, it sounds pretty, I guess not crazy to say, but you know, it will absolutely happen.
It's human nature.
Yeah.
It's human nature. So and so ultimately, when it comes to coping, as I said, don't dismiss that you're not feeling well or whatever. I had a down day yesterday. I was completely out of everything. I was on the verge of tears all of that during all day. Probably that I had the mild symptoms, but anyway, I had it. I had to acknowledge it, accept it, not fight it. And I had a good night's sleep. And now today I'm feeling better again and ready to go. So that also implies that it's not mindset only. It's respect yourself. So I have heard a lot of people saying, oh, and I'm so depressed and I spend my days in my pajamas and etc. I'm not spending my days in my pajamas. Come on, I respect myself too much for that. Yeah. So it's not giving grip to that type of attitude. It's also recognizing that you need some form of self-care, whatever that is for you. Yeah. Whether that it's meditation, whether it's exercise, whether it is dancing, whatever, or a combination of all of that. You need that. You need good sleep. So what can you do to have better sleep? Sleep is the third vital element that we need to be alive. And so what can you do to make sure that you go to sleep as de-stressed as possible so that you have good quality sleep? Well, it's not by binge watching COVID, whatever type of programs until midnight that's going to happen. Food, eat as healthy as possible. I mean, so it's the combination of all of that. I do believe that everything in life is a matter of balance. It's not about everything being all black or all white. How can you find a balance that works for you? The key to that is, and that's completely the companion, I would say, approach of the work that I do. It's funny because I was cleaning some stuff on my laptop, came across very old interviews of mine when I started coaching some 10, 12 years ago now, where I've always been saying the same to my clients. Again, you have a vision. And then from that space, every single day, ask yourself, what is my intention for today? Remember, you want to focus your 100% of energy on something that works for you. And with that intention, you look at what is it that I'm going to work on today specifically. Not my wash list that will depress me because I have only ticked 3 boxes out of it and there's so much more to do. That's totally disempowering. That's overwhelming. So choose what you're going to work on today. Put it in your calendar so that if suddenly you're overwhelmed by something, you can then say, oh, what do I need to do next? Oh, this. And don't ask yourself, go for it, do it. As opposed to start, with your head going in all places. But at the end of the day, ask yourself what worked well, what was challenging, what can I improve? So be a little Edison, invent a new lamp bulb every day. And when you see what hasn't worked, readapt it for the next day. And that's all about raising your self-awareness so that from that place you can then make more conscious choices. Again, coming back to what I said earlier on, it's never the circumstances that dictate our situation. It's how we react to them. And that you can only do if you are self-aware. So the more you're self-aware of how you function, the quicker you can shorten the process of fear taking the space. Your mind can only focus on one thing at a time. So if you focus on fear, and the key word is focus here. If you focus on fear, it will inflate, and then it will paralyze you. So the key is to identify at an earlier stage that you're operating from that place of fear, so that you can then, with a series of tools, focus on something else. And that's how you use it as a fuel, as opposed to let it paralyze you.
Brilliant. No, that's amazing advice. One other thing that I wanted to ask you before we wrap up this interview was a lot of our founders obviously are not just taking care of themselves, but they've also got teams that they're supporting, and they probably had to, or maybe have had to make some quite hard decisions over the last couple of weeks about what's happening in their businesses and so on and so forth. Have you got anything? Have you got any tips or any kind of advice or thoughts that you'd like to share about how founders and founding teams can sort of assist their teams as well as themselves?
So I don't have a team directly, but indirectly I have, because that's all my Athena members. That's over 100 ladies. And I would be tempted. So it's coming back to your attitude anyway. Who are you as a person? Are you really interested in the people aspect of things? So that's something that needed to be there from before all of this started, of course. If you're operating from that type of space, you keep in mind your business. However, you're also interested in the well-being of your employees, or people you work with, whether outsourced or not. Again, I think it's having that vision of what you want to achieve. It's transmitting it. It is being the walking example of what you're saying you're doing. So don't ask them to do something you're not doing yourself. And it may sound difficult. Some people are shying away from, I don't know if that's an English expression, that's a French expression, to call a cat a cat. So don't try to, let me put it this way. Generally speaking, British people tend not to say things directly. Say things the way, and that's the Dutch in me, because French will say it, but in a very convoluted way. The Dutch people are saying the things the way they are. It may hurt in the moment, but then help them in how you can adapt to that. So that whole positive attitude, or I would say positive talk that I'm having, I'm not only talking like that, I'm actually doing it myself. So I'm an example of what I'm saying. Then every time I identify a member who's down or whatever, I will spend the time with them to help them think differently, to help them see. Yesterday, the lady that I spoke to said at the end of the call, I feel so much better, thank you. So these are things that can help. There is no miracle cure to this. And I mean, if you're talking to, I don't know, if you have a team of 1,000, it becomes difficult, of course, to pick up your phone and call each of them. But every opportunity that I'm having to talk to them directly, I will. This morning I'm running today a meeting, an Athena meeting online with 27 ladies. I realized that I had created a profession clash. I had invited a profession that I already have. That's not allowed. And I immediately sent her a message. I could have just sent a message announcing it and that's it, you can't come. I've asked, when can we talk? Because it's an opportunity for me to talk to her. Yeah. So it's that type of things. It's being consistent and coherent. And I think that at some point, I would say that with a startup type of environment, don't do as if everything is okay if that's not how you feel. So you say, see, I told you yesterday I was down. I wasn't feeling well at all. I've been spending my day on the verge of tears. I'm a human being too. It's not because overall I have the right attitude that I'm a human being. Yeah. But then again, from that place of awareness, it helps me see that I am in that place. I process and then I move forward. So it's the coherence, I think, of the message and of the attitude.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's important. I mean, I think as a British person, I can attest to the fact that we're not as direct, perhaps, as the Dutch. But yeah, I think that's vitally important. I think trying to sort of sugarcoat what's going on, because I think that's the worst thing for teams as well. Kind of, if there's only 5 to 10 of you working on a project, and the leader is kind of, oh, everything's fine, and then actually in 3 weeks time, everything's not fine and the company's got to shut, or whatever it might happen, that's absolute worst case scenario. It's just the worst place to be. And I think that sort of developing a bit of honesty, and I totally agree with you about keeping that communication going as well, particularly as most people are probably working from home right now, so they're not together. That sort of 5-minute interaction around the water cooler isn't happening. So you've kind of got to not force it, but you've got to make it happen. You've got to get on Zoom, you've got to get on Skype. Other providers are available, I should say, in good BBC fashion. I think that's absolutely vital.
Again, human nature, when we don't know, we imagine. And the tendency is never to imagine good things. It's to imagine bad things. So in fact, not saying is worse than saying something that hurts in the moment, but then you can build from there. That's always me. That I have, when I was an executive coach in France, that's what I did the first 8 years of my work, of my business. I've worked in change management a lot. And oh my God, how often were things just not said? And then people imagine, and they can only imagine bad things. That's just the way the human nature is. And when I was in France, before, so up to 5 years ago, I was living in a very small village, and in France they are not that advanced in coaching, etc. It's more for executives and that sort of things, less for businesses, etc. So I was very isolated. In fact, I have been living for 3-4 years totally virtually, because my surrounding was a negative one, so was toxic for me, which is, by the way, another tip. If you are surrounded by people who are only focusing on all the dramas that can happen, cut them out of your life as much as you can. Surround yourself with people who will be uplifting you. And that's what I was doing. I did not have that environment in France back then, because people just didn't understand what I was doing. And so I was living virtually. I was having all my friends in Facebooks, groups, etc. And that's where I was getting my support from. So you and I had a coffee before together. So, okay. So sometimes with time difference, it can be you have a coffee and I have a wine, or vice versa. But it works. And once you get over, of course, nothing will ever replace the real human connection, the in-person one. Yeah, that's true. But I give an example. I have been interviewing women who made things happen in their life, so who reinvented themselves, for 3 years. 113 interviews. For me, these were so real. And sometimes they were at the other end of the world, me with a glass of wine and them with coffee, or vice versa. And one day I was sitting at my desk and I moved, and there was a briefcase under my desk, and I kicked the briefcase, and I said sorry to the person on the video, because I forgot that we were not live. I thought I had kicked her leg. So that's how real it is. So once you get used to it, it can be so incredibly powerful. You can build real relationships.
Yeah, I think that's something that's key right now for people. Is I think there's a great tendency. There's a bit, I guess. I mean, I'm sure this isn't the case for everybody who kind of works from home, or is having to work from home, or who is away from the physical kind of interactions with their network of friends and work colleagues and so on and so forth. But there's a tendency to kind of only connect when you're at home, when you really need to, and I think that's something people have got to get over really quickly. Is just jump on Zoom for 5 minutes and have that chat that you would have had with Dave from accounts you know, when you bump into him in the hallway in your office building or whatever, you know, you've got to kind of be mindful to not miss out on those kind of opportunities. I think that's super important. Okay.
Again, you know, Ben, just to close on that, again, human nature is searching for community. And it's really something that's a whole networking concept, is that you are giving, you are nurturing before you actually need. Otherwise it doesn't work. So as you say, have those water cooler conversations, and it doesn't have to be long, but for people, so and people need and love to be seen and heard. So if you are giving them 5 minutes of your time, it will make them feel so much better.
Awesome. Okay, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you this morning.
My pleasure.
Brilliant advice, and I'm sure something that our community at Decksender is going to really enjoy watching. And obviously, what we'll also do is share some details. So I guess if anybody wants to reach out to you, they can do. Not really much more to say. Thank you for being with us.
Ben, just maybe one precision, because my positioning is clearly women, but I'm not excluding men. I'm not putting energy in finding them, but if they find me and we're a good fit, no problem with working with men as well. So don't, if you have a lot of you know, male members, I don't want them to feel excluded, because everything I'm saying applies to men as well.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, as we're all aware of the certain gender bias in the startup world, there are more men on Decksender than there are women, although we are looking to make some changes there. So that's, in fact, actually, to sort of wrap this up, we will follow up and come back and talk to you about the Athena network and female founders in particular. That's something that we really like to explore with you. So we'll pick that up as a follow up.
Excellent.
At some point in the future. Brilliant.
Thank you for joining us. And stay safe all. Bye.
And you.